record this too, I guess, right? So live stream. Oh, not recorded,
Yes.
live stream. Yeah, got it. Great. Okay.
No messing around.
Yeah.
All righty. Hello and welcome to Canada Reads American Style. I'm Shauna, and actually it's really funny how naturally that still rolls off my tongue because we've turned over the podcast to Tara and Rebecca, and they're doing such a great job with it. So I really want to thank all of our fans for your messages of support and well wishes. It's so exciting to join everyone tonight, and I've been doing a little bit of this and that, learning a new language, baking. Like, it's so hard. I'm trying really to make a soft, structurally sound, gluten-free sugar cookie. And it's like the hardest thing in the world to do. But I'm very happy to be joining everyone tonight to help kick off celebrating CBC's Canada Reads One Book to Connect Us. Every evening this week, Canada Reads American Style podcast will post a Canada Reads recap featuring tonight's panel, minus Allie and myself, available from your podcast app of choice.
Are you good? Is that it? Are you good? I just want to say to everybody out there, Shauna makes really bakery quality cookies. And so the fact that she's working on that, that's a really great project. So good for you. Now, I just want to say that I'm happy to introduce Ali Hassan, who has always carved time out for us, which we really appreciate. And he really needs no introduction, but I'm going to say a few things about what he's up to and then let him add anything he might want to add. But as you all know, he plays Ramesh on Run the Burbs, which is a wonderful new TV show. And it's Andrew Fung's program with all of his crew and actors, and they're just incredible. And they've been picked up for a second season, which I'm very happy about. Ali also has a podcast, Doctor versus Comedian, with his good friend, Dr. Asif Doja. They already have 56 episodes out, and I don't know how they keep that pace going. It's incredible. And he also has a memoir coming out in September of this year, Is There Bacon in Heaven, which you can pre-order. I checked it out, and you can actually pre-order. But obviously, the reason he's here with us today is this is his 6th year of hosting CBC's Canada Reads, which starts tomorrow, Monday, March 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And you can watch on or listen on CBC Radio 1, CBC TV, CBC Gem, and on the CBC Books website. And I'm kind of guessing there's a theme here. So anyway, Ali, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be able to make time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so Ali, on the eve of Canada's Great Book Debate, we would be remiss if we didn't ask you about your book, your new memoir that's coming out in September that Rebecca mentioned. I would love it to hear like a little comparison of your writing process for stand-up versus your memoir. Like, how did you find that?
Yeah,
that
well, I mean, you know, when you're doing stand-up, at least the style of stand-up that I do, which is, you know, a little bit of, you know, self exploration and admissions about yourself and very, you know, more personal storytelling and personal comedy. You think you're really exploring things about yourself in stand-up. And then you start working on a solo show. So something in the neighborhood of 80 to 90 minutes versus these small sets that you have. And you say, oh my God, stand-up was nothing. I wasn't even exploring anything. I was barely scratching the surface. A solo show, that's really like self-exploration. And then after that, once I started writing a book, I go, oh, neither of those are anything. A book is really an unbelievable level of self-exploration because you write stuff and you're like, that should be about, I don't know, 10,000 words. And then you look like, oh no, it's 3,000. Oh, I'm not even close to where I'm supposed to be for this chunk. So you have to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you have, in my case, I'm lucky enough to have an editor who adds to that and says, this is all great. Why are you telling this story? What is your motivation for telling it? Why? What will people get from it? What do you hope people will get from it? How does it tie into the book? So it's really like, it's quite hard work. At least I found it to be to write in this memoir style. I found it to be a lot of work, a lot of focus. And it's not just as simple as sitting and writing. The sitting is very important. You got to be there. You got to put in the hours. But you can sometimes write for a number of hours and everything you wrote that day gets scrapped because it's like, this didn't lead our story anywhere. This is not a relevant story. I got it out, which is great, but consider it a couple of, warm up laps around the track, but nothing that really contributes to the overall product. So I found it quite challenging, but very rewarding. And it's like so many things, you keep at it and you keep at it and you keep, turning that piece of coal. And then you finally say, oh, this has got, shades of a diamond anyway. If it's not a full diamond, it's got shades of something beautiful. So I like the process. I found it very challenging. And if you have, any attention deficit like I do, or if you have challenges with your focus, it will be a tough grind to write a book. I think people who are hyper focused are well designed to sit and write books.
Well, I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone, but we're all really looking forward to it.
It's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali.
Ali, thank you so much for being with us again. And your book is on my TBR. It's on my wish list to get as soon as it comes out.
Awesome.
My question for you is, I've been watching some of the podcasts that Tara and Rebecca have been doing, and they've been talking to some of the defenders, and they've been talking about how they prepare. But I'm wondering how you prepare as the host. And, it's not like you just sit there and go, okay, let's just talk about books. What kind of things do you have to do to prepare for the debates?
Yeah, I think I've talked to you about this in the past too, that there has been a conversation. I don't maybe debate's too strong, but there's been a conversation about should a moderator, in the interests of being truly impartial, should a moderator even read the books? Because inevitably, when you read 5 books, you'll have your own preferences and biases and so on. I just found I dismissed the idea that I could not read the books immediately. The idea of being a moderator and somebody on the panel says, well, this is what, Lucille's thoughts were about this. And I'm sitting there going, geez, I wonder who Lucille is. That doesn't make for a good moderator in my mind, right? I should be able to say, Lucille, of course, the protagonist from your novel, at least so I can help, especially because this is such a big radio listening audience for CBC, for Canada Reads. I'm also the proxy for a listening audience, right? I'm helping them something when they can't visualize something, when they can't see something. Sometimes an author will raise a book and point, and maybe a TV audience will assume that, oh, he probably means the lead character in his book or whatever the case is. But for radio, I think for me, it's very important that I read. So I read the books, and then I work hard to squash all my opinions about the books. Because I should have no opinion as a good moderator. And then, to be honest, a lot of the work has been done without me even really considering it work over the years of me hosting hundreds and hundreds of shows of various kinds, whether they are comedy shows or fundraisers or luncheons or corporate comedy shows. I've done a lot of the work in the sense of how to leave an awkward situation, or how to balance from low energy to high energy, or vice versa. So I've done a lot of that. So it's really about, in the week before, looking at notes that I've made for myself over the years, working with the CBC Books team to just do a reminder, like, yes, you know how to host, but remember what's required for Canada Reads. Sometimes something will be very heavy. Sometimes the audience will need a warning. So it's just about trusting that I have some of that skill set already from more than 15, because I used to host weddings before I started doing stand-up comedy. So probably 20 years of hosting. I have that skill set, just need a little, reminder. And I need to probably most importantly remind myself that I have no opinion about the books until this is over.
I have a follow-up question, because the question that you have in front of you, are they scripted for you? I mean, maybe you've written them or someone's written them. Or do you ever just kind of go off script and ask something in the moment?
That happens quite a lot. And that happens because I have listened to interviews, and we've all listened to interviews like that, where somebody says, well, when I was 16, I probably had the worst year of my life. And I think that's what shaped, my views on this. And then the interviewer goes, anyway, getting back to your album, and you're like, what about, are we not going to even, worst year of his life? We're not even going to explore what the worst year of this person's life. So I get very frustrated by that kind of stuff. So definitely when somebody says something that hints at something, that suggests something, if somebody has mentioned it, it's almost like they're giving you permission to ask about it. And in that moment, they can say, look, I don't really want to discuss it any further. And that's fine. But often, now, of course, there are time constraints. We have a hard clock on Canada Reads, so you can't always. But when I'm able to explore a little bit more about something somebody said, not only just personal things, but, you don't want to leave it just like this book, it bored me. Okay, can you extrapolate? Right? So the extrapolation might not be part of the questions, but we need to know, as an audience, myself, panelists, we need to know why this book might have been. So often that question is crafted by the CBC Books team. Then my input may or may not come into the question, but certainly after the questions get answered, I'm sort of trying to take the reins and guide things in a certain direction.
Okay, thank you.
You do a great job.
Do you think that happens more often at the beginning of the competition versus at the end, where everybody's starting to get their voice and they know exactly what they want to say?
I think it happens more at the end because you have much more time as you get to day 3 and day 4, right? And so there's time for me to be like, why don't you expand on that and tell us what you mean by that? And, oh, you've made this claim, but where did you see that in the book? I can't really ask that on day 1. It's such a short time from introduction of the guests to introduction of their books to a little debate period. And then before you know it, we're voting out that first book. So usually the later in the week, we can get to more meaty stuff.
Am I next? Rebecca, you're muted.
Yeah, Jolene, did you have a follow-up you wanted to ask? I thought you had something else you wanted to say.
No, that's okay. I think there's been plenty of follow-ups with that, so
Okay.
I'll leave it.
Okay.
I'll make just a quick comment. It's not a question, but it hadn't even really occurred to me that a moderator, in this case, I guess, might not read the books, because in the past couple of years, I've seen you, when somebody says something about a book, you'll say, oh, well, that sort of similar thing happened in this other book. Like, do you have a comment on that because it's something similar in your book? And I just can't imagine not having that insight into what happens in the books in order to like get them to talk about certain things that might have happened, like those commonalities.
I think, God forbid if I got COVID, we should really knock on something here, but if I got COVID or something, we'd have to have somebody sub in for me. And in that situation, they would not have been able to read the books and prepare. And then you'd see somebody who's just strictly a professional host.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, it would make for a slightly different show. But it would get the job done. And we're very lucky to have a huge pool of very talented hosts. But I think, if you compared the two, you'd have a different show when you have somebody hosting who doesn't know the material or have an appreciation for it, or who hasn't met the authors or read about them, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That makes sense. Along the same lines of preparing for the debates, we normally talk to you after the debates are all done. This is kind of a cool opportunity. We don't know what's going to happen this week. And my question is just around having someone so young on the panel. Do you anticipate moderating any differently because you're going to have a 15-year-old on the panel? Or are you just going to, maybe you'll just see how it goes, but is that something that's already in your head as something to watch for? I'm thinking specifically about a couple of years ago where things were a little bit contentious.
Mm-hmm. I know what you're thinking about. Last year, Scott Hellman was a young fella. I can't remember. He was somewhere between 19 and 21. I can't remember his exact age. He was incredibly confident, incredibly thorough, incredibly thoughtful. That's my first thing that comes to mind, that the young people don't need to be treated with kid gloves, especially when they're going to be on this stage. And they now, if it was 15-year-old me, you'd have to have handled him a little different. Hey, dum dum, are you listening? Somebody would have had to snap their fingers, repeat stuff. I mean, this young lady is not just an actor and performer, but an activist as well, and with a big following. And I don't know. I think it would be a discredit to her to treat her sort of like a child. And I so far I haven't planned to sort of I haven't even when I'm okay with teasing people about their older age sometimes. I'm less inclined to just because I have two teenage daughters too, and I see how it goes. So I'm less inclined to even talk about that. Like, I think people in the radio world need to know that this is a young woman to appreciate, where she's coming from and what her opinions are based on, and how impressive a human being she is. That at 15 I think so. We'll have to mention it, but I'm less inclined to dwell on it.
As a follow-up, do you think, or has maybe CBC talked about this at all, about whether or not this will bring in like viewership or like a different demographic of readers?
Absolutely,
because she's younger. So she my kids know who she is. She's on the BBC.
Yeah.
So.
Same here. Yeah. We used to have the live audiences, obviously, before COVID. So 2017, 2018, 2019, I got used to 3 years of live audiences. And my favorite thing would be when a teacher brought their class in. And it would happen a few times a week. We would also go visit schools and talk to students in libraries. We would also, be part of events that involved kids. I say kids, older than the 7th or 8th grade. And it did always shock me a little bit, and it shouldn't have, but it did shock me how many young people were interested in A, reading, and B, more specifically, Canada Reads. People who were invested in it, people who really enjoyed it. And I was like, wow. And it goes back to like just thinking about what I was doing when I was in the 9th or 10th grade. And it certainly wasn't anything to do with reading competitions. So I'm just like really, really impressed. And I think to some degree, we do focus on that young, to your question, Larissa, we do already focus on that group. I think teachers, introduce their kids to their students to this show. There's a program, curio.ca, that has resources for teachers and for students around Canada Reads. So there's already a bit of a framework that exists, but there's no doubt that having Malia on there will further entrench that, our I was going to say stronghold. I think that's too strong. We don't have the teens in a headlock. I just think it'll further entrench our position with young readers. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing, I can't say one bad thing about that. The more young readers you have, it's great for society at large. I know I just get thrilled when I see young kids reading.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Sarah was unable to be with us this week, but she is listening right now. So hi, Sarah. Your question that you submitted was, do you have any books you would recommend to those who are new to Canada that reflect our diversity, knowing that Sarah is Canadian and Shauna is American?
I mean, that question is quite loaded, not super easy to answer, because everybody's Canada is different. And some people might say, oh, somebody who's new to Canada should read this book about immigrants. Somebody who's new to Canada should read this book about racism. Somebody who's new, but so, it's hard to have a single answer to that, definitely. But I think, if you look at this year, there's a number of books that really dig deep into some of the struggles we have as a country in Canada, and I think those are to be looked into. I can't talk too much about that. It might feel like I'm being partial to one book over the other, but I think over the years, forgiveness was an incredible book, you have to sort of look, what are people's goals when they're reading as well? Is it to go on a journey and open your eyes to experience you've never had? Is it to learn about a community? Is it to learn about your own sort of maybe blind spots that you may have about a variety of issues? Depending what it is, some books are more suitable than others. But I think Forgiveness was a great book because it highlighted the story of Japanese Canadians, and it did teach this beautiful lesson about forgiveness. I think, the boat people was also very interesting. We learned a lot about, there's something that I knew somewhat. I was somewhat versed in this community, but learning about the Tamil community and some of the struggles they went through, I thought that was very interesting. The woo-woo about mental illness in homes, in immigrant homes where people don't necessarily talk about them. Holmes was another book written by, again, another young, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, maybe at the time. He illustrated the experience of being a refugee and sort of fleeing for his life. And I think those are also great books. And a lot of the Indigenous books we see, I think, I'm just going to say something from my own experience, and that is that a lot of the immigrants and immigrant families that I know, particularly the ones whose kids are my friend, but second generation, when they came here, the Canada that they were, talked about, the Canada that was painted, never included the Indigenous experience, the Indigenous history. Then they come here, and many of them are very appreciative to Canada. Canada gave us our start. Canada gave us our chance. Canada helped us build this wonderful thing. To then see that Canada that you love and appreciate and respect and are grateful for in this light, with how it's treated its Indigenous communities, it's that very inconvenient truth that's spoken about. It's very uncomfortable. But I think the time has come to, the time has passed a long time ago, but the time is definitely now for everybody to have uncomfortable conversations. So to that end, the answer to your question is, I think people should read books that make them a little bit uncomfortable. And now I'm just wearing a zip-up tracksuit, and I feel stupid talking about this, but fashion, or at least dressing with some interest in being a little bit fashionable, has become a little bit more of interest to me personally over the last few years, over the last, I would say, 6-7 years. And I've worked with a variety of stylists because I work on different shows. And the message that I've heard repeatedly is, you go with what you're comfortable with, and then you push an extra 10%. And so what that means is, okay, I would wear that sweater. Would you wear that sweater? Great. Now put 2 bracelets on. Put some accessory around your neck, put a scarf, or you're like, oh, I don't know if I would do that. And that's like how you push and you push and you push. And I thought that was always a great analogy for so many things, including reading and including about learning about people. I'm not really interested in that community. I don't really know that much, but push a little bit, 10%, 15%, and you'll be, in my opinion, surprised at how much you learn and how eye-opening it can be. And this is something I've really learned to appreciate thanks to Canada Reads. I think people should push themselves to slightly uncomfortable places, and they'll be better for it and richer for it.
Wow, that was such a great answer. And Sarah sent back a joke, and now I'm just like, we're gonna leave it with your great answer instead of a joke.
maybe the joke is part of a follow-up question later. We like follow-ups here. It'll leave enough time between what I've said. And
awesome, because I do have another question or a couple of questions from Caroline in our YouTube live here. Rebecca, do you want to go, or do you want me to ask Carolyn's questions?
Go ahead and do Carolyn, and then I'll ask my question after that. That's fine.
Okay. Allie, do you have a favorite book from past Canada Reads? Also, what do you think about Canada Reads devoted solely to Indigenous authors/topics?
Well, I don't know. So answering the second question first, I wonder if And again, this is just wondering, I wonder if at that point, if you have a solely Indigenous show, you run the risk of being a show that's preaching to the choir. I think the potential value of Canada Reads is that it is about Canada. It is for Canadians, and people tune in coast to coast, different backgrounds. The CBC Books team works very, very hard to have people with all kinds of different backgrounds, socioeconomic, diverse backgrounds, regional backgrounds, religious backgrounds, political backgrounds. They really work hard. And if they can't do it one year, they know that we didn't get anybody from the West Coast. We didn't get anyone who was sort of more on the conservative side politically. We have to put that in for next year or the year after. They work very hard to have this sort of long range view of diversity. And my personal worry would be to have a show with solely Indigenous authors and Indigenous books and themes. You may run the risk of just Indigenous people, who are Indigenous or who solely have interest in Indigenous issues reading those books. And I say that because I personally have read books from Indigenous authors about Indigenous themes that I don't believe I would have read, or if I would have, it might have been years down the road when somebody finally says, oh, you should read. You know how books are. It's like you've got this top 20 list of like these books you got to read. And it's hard to shove things in to, move these down and put one in. So you have your list, and your list is based on your experiences. My list is half based on some of the books my dad used to teach in his English classes, or something people who I trust and know well have said to me, I know you'll like this book. But if something's just on a list somewhere, I'm like, oh, maybe, I don't know if I would. Being on Canada Reads, being surrounded by people who not only know me and know what I like, but also have very keen eye to great writing, it helps, it really puts me in a position of like learning so much more than I normally would. So answering the second question first has made me forget what the first question was. So you have to remind me what that was. A favorite over the years, I think.
A favorite book from past Canada Reads.
Yeah, I think I can name a couple. I would say for writing, if people who really like writing, I thought David Cherry-Andy's Brother was very nice, and it's turning into a film that should hopefully come out before the end of this year. I've gotten to see a little bit of some scenes of it, and the acting is absolutely phenomenal. But that book and the writing was really like, it was fiction, but it was not fiction, and it was not poetry, but it was poetic, and it was really a pleasure to read. American War by Omar Al-Akhad, who again has a book, What Strange Paradise, in this year's Canada Reads. That book was incredibly powerful. That book haunted me. That book, the couple of times I read it at night, I was like, I can never do this again. The worst dreams, nightmares, absolute nightmares I would have. And it was really something. That book stayed with me for quite some time. That year, The Marrow Thieves was also fantastic. Again, not a book that I could read at night. The Break, Katharina Vermette's The Break was, I talk about that book a lot because, again, what do I know? Look, that book is about multiple generations of women who are Indigenous living in the north end of Winnipeg. All of that has nothing to do with a Pakistani Canadian from Quebec who speaks French, who now lives in Toronto. It's a completely different world. Would I have put The Break up in like my top 5? I got to read this book. I don't believe I would have. And now I'm on Canada Reads, and I oblige myself to read it. And it's, to this day, one of my favorite books that I've ever read. So that's one that I bring up a lot because it's like, I think it's critical not to judge a book based on the fact that it doesn't reflect your own experiences. As I read somewhere once, somebody said, it is art. It is not a vanity mirror. You're not supposed to be looking at yourself. And I find often you hear people say, oh, this doesn't reflect my experience. It doesn't. I don't think things always have to reflect your experience. In literature, there's also this idea of, seeing the world through somebody else's eyes and getting somebody else's perspective on something. So just off the top of my head, I think I can name those, but I don't know if you go wrong with any Canada Reads book, really.
I read What Strange Paradise last year when it was up for the Giller, and I read it and I loved it. And I thought, oh, I'm going to read American War. And I got it on my Kobo and I read the intro and I closed it and I said, nope, not right now.
Not right now.
Not right now.
You need to, there's a time. There's a time in everyone's life when there's a time. Another book I really loved, which is a not right now book for a lot of people, was
The Moon of the Crested Snow.
Not the Moon of the Crested Snow. Small game hunting. Small game hunting at the local Coward Gun Club.
Yes. Yeah.
Megan Gale Coles. Now, it was almost said as like a not discouraging, but it was almost said as a warning to me. It's very long and it has no chapters. And I was like, oh man, I better read this book first. I loved every single page of it. I just love it, but I also love a lot of dialogue. I love a lot of dialogue. The dialogue really stuck with me. I could see these people. I could see these venues. Their stories, every person's unique story really, really was so compelling. And many of those stories affected me deeply. I love the language. I really, really like that. And that's another book where people go, wow, 440 pages, no chapters. It just starts and then it ends 400 something pages later. Maybe not now, but I mean, I'm so happy.
That was one where not a single word was wasted. Every single word in that book was
absolutely
exactly where it should have been.
Can you imagine economy of words? And it's 444 pages. It's really something. Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to say, just as an American, having discovered Canada Reads, there are a million of these books already that I would have never read because, well, first of all, I wouldn't have necessarily known some of them, but I love that it pushes you out of your comfort zone, puts things in your hand that you just would never pick up on your own. I love that. The other thing I want to go back and just mention, when you talked about, and I kind of forgot about this, the live audience, and that there were kids, class visits in the audience. And that makes me so happy because in the United States, we are really being challenged with books being banned, challenges from communities, conservative families or whatever. And I think to myself, the things I've read on Canada Reads would just make American parents go completely crazy.
Oh, sure.
But thank God in Canada, at least, hopefully you don't have the same issues we're having. But I love that celebration of just writing books, everything is there and alive, because it's certainly under attack here in the United States. So I just wanted to say that. So
yeah, I was thinking about this just the other day. I think it was in Kentucky and Utah. And then of course, there's a number of states that are, wrapped up in this critical race theory issue. And I always think about Canada Reads and I always feel more grateful for it. And, every year or so, somebody or the other is sort of attacking libraries. They don't deserve public funding. They don't this and that. But Canada Reads holds on, weathers the storm. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's even if those kind of things do happen in Canada, in certain school districts and certain, counties or regions, I love the idea that kids can be like, well, nobody can tell me that I can't do some pleasure reading, and I'll just go on and I'll order books, or I'll go to a bookstore and I'll get the books that I've seen on Canada Reads.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So, well, the last question, I think, unless we have audience questions as well, or viewers, but I want to ask, since it is your 6th year hosting, and honestly, I know I probably speak for all of us, we hope that you will do this for however long you want to do this, so way past 6 years. But I wanted to ask if you ever remember, either in the 6 years you've been hosting or even prior if you watched, do you ever remember there being such a strong field of contenders? Because when Tara and I talked about how would we rank the books, either personally what we think or how we think the debate will go, we can't even touch the question because all 5 are so strong. And I just think this is going to be the greatest debate ever. So do you remember anything ever being this
There are a
competitive.
lot of award-winning books. Like there
Yeah.
are 2 Gillers and a Governor General's Award for Fiction, and then
That's
Scarborough
right.
has like 4 little badges on its cover.
Yeah, that's right.
Tons.
It's a bunch of stuff. Toronto Book Awards, Globe and Mail Best Book, Trillium Book Award. Life in the City of Dirty Water. I mean, this is also, you know, you're talking about the books. They've all been recognized for a variety of different things. And then the panelists also. No schlubs in the group, right? Like, I mean, pretty, you know, Mark Tewksbury's an Olympian, and when you have inevitably, we've had Olympians before, you know, Donovan Bailey and Clara Hughes come to mind, and they bring a certain amount of work ethic that I think also raises everybody's work ethic. Maybe they would have been that way anyway, but having an Olympian in the group, you know that somebody's coming to not mess around. And so then everybody's like, well, we're all not messing around. So it is a very, very strong show. It is a very strong show. To say, do I remember shows? I mean, that I don't want to take away from any of the other panelists over the years who are incredibly prepared and very thoughtful, and the other authors who were not maybe award-winning at the time, but then went on to become bestsellers and went on to win awards. But it is undeniable that this group of books is something to be reckoned with. It's going to be fiercely competitive, and to add to all of that, also pretty heavy. Some very, very heavy themes. It's not just right. So, yeah, we're going to be knee deep into it this week. It is going to be interesting to watch how it all goes in. How we get through it all.
Wow. Well, thank you, Shauna. Any other questions for Ellie?
Yes, there is another question. So, in the past, you've shared with Canada Reads American Style in our group how you became the host of Canada Reads, which was you had applied to actually be a contender. You were going to be a contender, and then you ended up being the host instead. So Caroline's question is very interesting. She says, if you were a champion of a book, what would your strategy be based on what you've observed in the previous years?
I'm not particularly competitive. I've never been. I just don't. I always hope that we live in a world where multiple people can shine, and it's not sort of a zero-sum game. I don't know if I shared this with you, but when I used to be a manager of a restaurant, the owner of my restaurant would always send me down the street, go see how Star of India is doing. And then I'd go there and I'd be like, yeah, they're doing really well. Okay, go see how Guido and Angelina is doing on the other corner. And I go, yeah, they're doing really well. And I was like, the amount of time this guy worries every Friday and Saturday about how all these other restaurants are doing. Why don't you just spend that time and energy investing in your own restaurant instead of having a horrible buffet that is completely unimaginative and lacks anything of, and it's completely unremarkable. Why don't you do something good here? So I'm not particularly competitive. That said, because your question is based on what I've learned over the years, I would probably be strategic, and that's not really me, but I would probably vote people off based on this person will be a threat on day 3 or day 4. And that's crazy talk coming from me. And I can't believe I'm saying, because on paper, I'm the guy who would be like, well, no, it's the books. We have to focus on the books. We have to focus on which book should win this and everything. But at the end of the day, if I see a competitor who is incredibly thorough and very savvy and very calculated, I'm going to try to knock that panelist off. That's how I would do it. And that's not how I would think I would do it, but that's what I've learned. You get rid of those quiet, those silence, the silent but deadly types. Humble the poet comes to mind when he won with 15 dogs. They all just left him alone for 3 days. And all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, this guy's been under our nose the entire time. So yeah, that's what I would do. I would get rid of my competition.
That sounds like a fabulous strategic plan to me. So, all right. Well, I believe that's all the questions we have to all of our listeners. So With that, don't forget to listen to tomorrow night's podcast with Tara and Rebecca, recapping the first day of CBC's Canada Reads on your podcast app of choice.
And Allie, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you
my pleasure.
great success for this whole week. We'll all be watching, and good luck for your sixth year of the debates.
Thank you. Thank you for your continued interest and love for not just Canada Reads, but literature in general. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.